Introduction. The frozen whispers of survival. Imagine the winter of 1944. The air doesn't simply feel cold, it stalks you. It bites, it hunts, it waits for the moment when your guard lowers just enough for the frost to seep into your bones. In the frozen trenches of the Ardennes and the deep black forests of the Eastern Front, men were surviving winters that should have killed them outright. No electricity, no gas lines, no fuel trucks rumbling through the night. Only knowledge, quiet, whispered knowledge, shared between soldiers who understood that forgetting even one detail could mean freezing to death before dawn. These were lessons scratched into the margins of field journals, etched into the memories of men who had watched entire battalions fall, not to bullets, but to the cold. So here is the question that should stop every modern builder in their tracks. Why did cabins built 80 years ago, with nothing but hand tools and wartime scarcity, stay warmer than many modern homes equipped with expensive furnaces and climate-controlled perfection? And how is it that bunkers carved directly into frozen earth kept soldiers alive at 40 degrees below zero while burning almost no fuel at all? The truth is uncomfortable. Today we live inside what architects proudly call glass boxes, homes dependent on a constant drip feed of electricity and gas, homes that can stay warm only as long as the grid stays on. We traded resilience for convenience. We traded independence for dependence. Yet the warriors of the greatest generation operated on an entirely different blueprint. Their secret weapons weren't high-tech heaters or insulated polymers. They were principles deep, almost forgotten principles rooted in physics, in nature, and in a level of resourcefulness we barely recognize today. And so, in this chapter of Historia Prime, we are returning to that battlefield of ideas. We are reopening the frostbitten notebooks. We are rediscovering the 10 cabin heating secrets of World War II that modern builders deliberately left behind. These methods cost almost nothing. They require no monthly bills, and when the grid fails, and it will fail, they may be the difference between a cold, miserable night and a warm, survivable one. By the end of this journey, you will understand why your grandparents stayed warmer than you do. You will understand how they built heat, not from technology, but from design. And most importantly, you'll know exactly how to reclaim that forgotten resilience for yourself today. Take a deep breath. The cold is coming, and the forgotten wisdom of 1944 is waiting to guide us back to warmth. Welcome to 10 WWII cabin heating secrets. Why did modern builders forget these? Let the investigation begin. Secret 1. The thermal mass foundation. Earth is your ally. To understand the first forgotten secret, we need to look downward, far beneath the frost, beneath the snow, beneath the frozen breath of winter itself. Because while modern builders treat the ground beneath your feet as a hostile force to be blocked, sealed, and insulated against, World War II engineers understood something radically different. They knew the Earth was not the enemy. The Earth was the ally. 6 feet below the surface, the soil keeps a steady, stubborn temperature of 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't care if a blizzard is raging above. It doesn't care if the wind chill is minus 40. Deep Earth maintains a quiet, constant warmth. A warmth soldiers relied on when everything else around them was trying to kill them. And so they dug. In frozen forests from Finland to the Ardennes, men carved foundations deep into the ground, lining them with stone or tightly packed earth. These weren't just walls, they were batteries. Thermal mass-dense materials like stone, brick, or raw earth absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. When that mass stays in contact with the stable temperature underground, it becomes a slow-burning, ever-giving heat source. A passive furnace. A quiet guardian that never runs out of fuel. One of the most remarkable examples didn't come from the battlefield at all, but from a frontier homesteader named Elias Turner back in 1887. while his neighbors' cabins froze so hard the frost grew inside on the walls. Turner's cabin was 40 degrees warmer. Why? He didn't rely on fire, he relied on physics. Turner raised his floor off the frozen surface and built a system of subterranean air channels, simple tunnels that allowed the constant warmth of the earth to circulate upward. His home never dipped below survivable temperatures, even during the bitterest cold snaps. And he achieved this stability not with machinery, but with design. This is what World War II engineers called thermal inertia, a natural buffer that prevents your living space from plunging into lethal cold. A foundation that holds heat longer than any fiberglass bat or drywall panel ever could. Yet today, we ignore it. We lift our homes away from the ground. We wrap them in thin, lightweight materials that trap a little warmth but store none. We sever the connection to the one heater that never fails, the earth itself. But the soldiers who endured the worst winters in human memory knew better. They trusted the ground, they built with mass, and they survived because of it. So as we uncover the forgotten engineering of World War II, remember this: warmth doesn't always come from flame. Sometimes it comes from the quiet heartbeat of the planet beneath your feet. And now, let's move deeper into the next secret, one that captures the heat that rises before it escapes into the night sky. Secret 2. The reverse ceiling trap. Catch the heat before it escapes. Heat rises. Everyone learns that in school, yet modern builders behave as if the rule somehow doesn't apply to roofs. A standard cabin today can lose up to 40% of its heat straight through the ceiling, silent, invisible, and expensive. But during the winters of World War II, forgetting this principle meant freezing to death. And so soldiers built their shelters with one idea in mind: if heat rises, then trap it before it escapes. This was the genius of the reverse ceiling trap. Instead of tall, vaulted ceilings that let warmth drift far above where anyone could feel it, wartime builders kept ceilings low, around 7 feet, so the heat stayed close to the human body. Then they added layers, a tight layer of wooden planks. Above that, natural insulation like straw, dried grass, wool or moss. And on top of everything, another layer of planks. These layers didn't just insulate, they created dead air pockets. Small sealed chambers of still air that act as one of the most efficient insulators on the planet. With no machinery, no electricity, and no technology, these cabins slowed heat loss to a crawl. By the time rising warmth reached the outer roof, it had already been absorbed, reflected, and pushed back downward. Soldiers reported feeling heat linger long after the fire had burned out. Meanwhile, modern homes with their high ceilings and thin insulation lose heat like a chimney laid sideways. What World War II engineers understood was simple. Creating heat is one thing, keeping it is the real survival skill. And the reverse ceiling trap turned every shelter into a quiet thermal vault, holding warmth exactly where human life needed it most. Up next is a secret that doesn't just trap heat, it invites free heat from the winter sun itself. Secret 3. The southern glass wall and the power of calculated overhangs. Before electricity made heating feel cheap and endless, builders had to think like astronomers. Every degree of sunlight, every shadow line, every seasonal shift mattered. And during World War II, cabin builders in the coldest regions used one of the simplest, most brilliant heating systems ever designed. A system that didn't burn a single piece of firewood. They built the southern glass wall. Instead of scattering windows randomly for aesthetics, they turned entire south-facing walls into glass, 50 to 70% in some cases. Because during the short, brutal days of winter, sunlight was more than light. It was fuel. It was free heat pouring straight into the cabin, warming floors made of stone, brick, or packed earth. Massive materials that absorbed heat by day and released it by night. But the true genius wasn't just the glass. It was the geometry above it, These builders designed precise roof overhangs, calculated down to inches. In winter, when the sun sat low on the horizon, its rays slid perfectly beneath the overhang and flooded the cabin with warmth. In summer, when the sun stood high, the same overhang blocked the heat entirely, keeping indoor temperatures cool without lifting a finger. No switches, no thermostats, no bills, just an intimate understanding of how the sun moves across the sky. For soldiers living through Arctic storms, this wasn't architecture, it was survival science. It meant a cabin could remain warm all day, even if the fire died at dawn. It meant fuel could be rationed without sacrificing comfort. It meant nature became part of the heating system instead of something to fight against. Contrast that with today. Modern builders place windows where the design looks nice, then rely on air conditioning to fix the overheating they caused, and rely on expensive heating systems to compensate for the solar energy they ignored. The veterans who mastered this secret would shake their heads. They knew that the sun, when used correctly, is the most reliable heater humanity has ever had. Harness it well, and winter becomes an ally. Ignore it, and your home becomes a glass box bleeding energy into the sky. Now let's step into the next secret, one that doesn't invite heat, but protects it by taming the most dangerous thief of all, the wind. Secret 4. The earthen berm windbreak, defending your heat from the invisible thief. To understand the next forgotten secret, we must confront an enemy far more destructive than the cold itself, the wind. Cold air chills you, but wind steals from you. It strips warmth from your walls as efficiently as dropping the temperature several degrees with every passing mile per hour. And during World War II, soldiers quickly learned that no amount of firewood could outburn a relentless, howling wind. So they built defenses, not with metal or weapons, but with earth. This strategy became known as the earthen berm windbreak. In exposed locations, open fields, frozen plains, treeless highlands, World War II engineers piled dense mounds of earth against the windward side of every shelter. Packed soil, reinforced with logs or stone, created a natural shield that broke the wind before it ever touched the cabin's walls. And when the Arctic ground was too solid to dig, soldiers adapted. They built the same formations out of snow-massive, curved banks that redirected the wind upward and away. Even temporary winter stations reported fuel savings of up to 60% simply by disrupting the smooth, laminar flow of cold wind across their structures. These berms didn't heat the cabin. They protected the heat the cabin already had. They stopped warm air from being sucked out. They eliminated drafts before they formed. They transformed the cabin from a lone structure taking the full force of winter into a sheltered pocket of calm air. It was simple, it was free, and it worked so well that many soldiers later said the berm, not the stove, was the real reason they survived. Yet today, in our pursuit of curb appeal and open landscaping, we cut down trees, clear natural barriers, flatten terrain, and leave our homes standing completely naked against the wind. Then we wonder why our heating bills rise like smoke from a chimney. W2 builders understood something modern designers have forgotten. You don't just heat a home, you defend it. And in the next secret, we discover how they protected that precious warm air even further by building a tiny space that acted as a shield against every time the front door opened. Secret 5. The double-entry airlock, the winter barrier that saved more heat than any stove. There is a moment in every winter, a moment so ordinary that most people never notice it, yet it is one of the biggest sources of heat loss in any home. It's the moment you open your front door, because in those 5 seconds, warm air doesn't simply drift out. It rushes out, pushed aside by a river of cold air forcing its way in. In that instant, you can lose 30 minutes of stored warmth. And during World War II, that kind of loss wasn't an inconvenience. It was a threat to survival. So soldiers, engineers, and northern builders turned to one of the most effective heating tricks ever invented: the double-entry airlock. Instead of a single door leading straight into the living space, they built two doors, separated by a small, unheated buffer room. You step in, close the outer door behind you, and then open the inner door to enter the warm cabin. In Sweden, this system was so essential that it earned a name of its own: the vintergång, the winter catch, the quiet guardian that prevented warmth from escaping into the cold. The idea was beautifully simple. Warm indoor air never touched the outside atmosphere directly. Cold air never had a chance to come rushing inside. Every exchange was slowed, softened, and contained within the airlock. And the numbers were astonishing. A test in Minnesota decades later showed that this simple architectural feature, nothing more than a tiny room and a second door, saved nearly $300 in heating costs in just one winter. For soldiers relying on rationed fuel and dwindling firewood, the savings meant survival. Yet today, many builders dismiss this as old-fashioned, a relic of another era, unnecessary in the age of central heating and triple-pane glass. But your heating bill disagrees, and every gust of cold air that blows into your home when you open the door is proof. W2 builders understood something we've forgotten. Heat is precious. Once lost, it is expensive to replace. But if you control the boundary between indoors and outdoors, you control the comfort of the entire home. And in the next secret, we'll see how soldiers didn't just protect their heat. They multiplied it by turning every fire into a long-lasting, high-efficiency engine. Secret 6. The rocket mass heater. The labyrinth of fire that outsmarted winter. To understand this next secret, imagine watching the heat from your fireplace, the heat you paid for with time, effort, and precious fuel, shoot straight up the chimney and vanish into the frozen sky. That is exactly what a standard fireplace does. It is beautiful, comforting, and disastrously inefficient. During World War II, soldiers didn't have the luxury of wasting warmth. Every stick of wood mattered, every flame counted, and so they turned to one of the most remarkable heating inventions ever created: the rocket mass heater, a labyrinth of fire designed to wring every last calorie of heat from a single burn. Instead of letting the flames roar upward and escape, these heaters forced the hot gases through a long, winding maze, sometimes 30 feet or more, carved into a block of heavy thermal mass like brick, clay, or stone. Inside this maze, the temperatures could reach 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. But the magic wasn't the fire, it was the journey. As the superheated smoke crawled through the channels, the masonry walls absorbed its energy. Inch by inch, the heat was stripped away and stored within the mass, turning the entire structure into a giant rechargeable battery of warmth. And by the time the exhaust finally left the chimney, the smoke had cooled to just 80 or 90 degrees, barely warm enough to melt frost. A single 1-hour firing could radiate heat for 12, sometimes 24 hours. This wasn't a modern invention. Medieval Russian peasants had mastered this centuries earlier. They called their version the pek a stove, perfected through generations of trial and error. They learned the exact physics. If smoke moved too quickly, it wasted heat. If it moved too slowly, it left tar and soot. Only when the flow was balanced, smooth, steady, controlled, did the stove reach its full brilliance. World War II engineers studied these systems, adapted them, and built them across the Arctic front. Soldiers would burn a bundle of sticks before dawn and return at night to find the cabin still radiating steady warmth from the same mass of bricks. Compared to modern fireplaces, which blast heat upward and out, the rocket mass heater feels almost supernatural. But there is no magic here, only physics, only intelligence, only the stubborn refusal of a generation to let warmth slip through their fingers. And in the next secret, we uncover another forgotten trick, not to generate heat, but to reflect it, bounce it, and send every precious ray back into the heart of the room. Secret 7. The reflective back wall, turning every stove into a radiant engine. There is a simple truth about heat that most people forget. Heat travels in straight lines. It radiates outward like light from a lantern, forward, sideways, and yes, straight into the wall behind your stove. In most modern homes, half of the heat your stove produces slams directly into the wall, gets absorbed, and disappears into the outside world. It's like throwing money at the cold and hoping it melts. But during World War II, soldiers didn't waste a single degree of warmth. They turned this small flaw into a powerful advantage, using one of the simplest, most overlooked tools in their entire arsenal, the reflective back wall. In frontline cabins, Arctic stations, and makeshift bunkers, soldiers scavenged whatever shiny materials they could find. Tin can lids hammered flat, aluminum mess kit panels, strips of polished scrap metal pulled from discarded equipment. They mounted these makeshift mirrors behind their stoves, sometimes with nails, sometimes with wire, sometimes held together with nothing more than stubbornness and frozen hands. And the effect was immediate. Instead of losing half the heat into the wall, the stove's radiant energy bounced back into the room, doubling its effective output, warming bodies faster and cutting fuel consumption by nearly half. A tiny iron stove that once heated a single corner could now warm an entire cabin. This wasn't high technology, it wasn't expensive, it was pure physics, brilliantly applied under the harshest conditions. Yet today, we place our modern stoves against drywall, one of the worst absorbers of radiant heat, letting warmth leak outward where no one can feel it. Then we wonder why our heating bills rise and our rooms never feel as warm as they should. The soldiers who survived those winters knew better. They understood that heat doesn't just need to be made, it needs to be directed. A reflective back wall turns every stove, no matter how small, into a radiant engine. It ensures that the heat you produce stays with you, not with the cold world outside. And now, in the next secret, we travel upward, to the warmest place in any cabin, and to the sleeping strategy that saved more lives than any blanket ever could. Secret 8. The stratified sleeping loft, climbing into the warmth that nature provides. To understand this next secret, you don't need a textbook. You only need to watch a candle flame. Heat rises, and once it rises, it stays there. Modern homes fight against this with brute force, heating the entire house just to make the bedroom comfortable. It's convenient, but extremely wasteful. During World War II, soldiers didn't have that luxury. Every ounce of warmth mattered. Every flame was precious. So instead of fighting physics, they used it. They built what became known as the Stratified sleeping loft, a simple, brilliant system that turned warm air's natural behavior into a survival advantage. During the day, life happened near the floor. Movement, work, and activity kept the body warm at ground level. But at night, when the cold pressed in and every breath felt heavy with frost, cabins transformed. Soldiers climbed upward, not randomly, but with intention. Just a few feet below the ceiling, warm air pooled like an invisible lake. It was the warmest part of the entire structure, even when the fire had burned out hours earlier. By placing sleeping lofts directly in this heat cell, WWII cabins created microclimates of safety. Temperatures could be 10, sometimes 15 degrees warmer than the air below. And in extreme cases, a single candle or ember was enough to keep the loft habitable. The military understood this perfectly. In barracks, triple-stacked bunks weren't just for space efficiency. They were thermal strategy. The top bunks, closest to the rising warm air, were always reserved for those who needed the most protection. This wasn't comfort. This was physics turned into survival engineering. And today, we've forgotten it. We heat entire open spaces, only to sleep at ground level, the coldest place in the room. We chase warmth horizontally when the real heat is waiting vertically. The soldiers of WWII knew better. They didn't heat the whole building. They heated the volume where human bodies actually slept. That is dynamic volumetric control, a concept so effective that, in emergencies, a family could survive the night with nothing more than a candle and a loft. And now, as we move forward, we'll explore another secret, one that used every meal, every flame, every spark of kitchen heat to warm the home long after dinner was done. Secret 9. The insulated cooking integration, turning every meal into a source of heat. In most modern homes, the warmth from cooking is treated like an inconvenience. Range hoods suck it out, vents blast it away. We burn fuel to create heat, and then we burn more fuel to get rid of it. But during World War II, when every scrap of wood and every ember mattered, nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. And so builders created one of the most ingenious heating systems ever designed, a system where dinner didn't just fill the stomach, it warmed the home long into the night. This forgotten technique was known as insulated cooking integration. Instead of placing cook stoves randomly in the middle of a room, WWII builders positioned them intentionally, pressing the back of the stove directly against a thermal mass wall made of brick, stone, or packed earth. When the stove burned, heat radiated backward into the mass, saturating it with warmth. Hours after the meal was finished, that same wall would continue releasing heat in a slow, steady pulse. And they didn't stop there. The chimney itself became a heating system. Instead of going straight up and out, chimneys were routed through the interior of the cabin. As hot exhaust climbed upward, it passed through the living space, releasing precious warmth along every inch of its path before finally exiting the roof. In some of the most brilliant wartime designs, stove exhaust was even channeled beneath sleeping benches or raised platforms. Soldiers would finish dinner, bank the fire, lie down, and feel warmth rising through the bed itself. The same flame that cooked the soup for the evening became the radiant heater that protected them through the night. These dual-purpose systems didn't require extra fuel. They didn't require extra equipment. They simply used what was already there and doubled the benefit. It was common for these cabins to cut their fuel use in half simply by integrating cooking heat into the building's thermal strategy. Contrast that with the modern home, where we pipe our cooking heat outdoors, then turn around and pay for more heat to replace the warmth we just threw away. The soldiers of World War II would have considered that madness. To them, every ember was an asset, every fire was an opportunity, and every meal was a chance to warm not just the body, but the home itself. In the next secret, we'll uncover a truth that might surprise you. The most powerful heater in a cabin wasn't a stove at all. It was the people inside it. Secret 10. The biological furnace, concentrating human heat for survival. This final secret is the one modern society finds hardest to accept, yet it is the most powerful, the most reliable, and the most ancient source of heat we possess. The human body is a furnace. Even at rest, a single person radiates roughly 100 watts of heat, the same output as a bright incandescent bulb. And in a small, tightly built wartime cabin, 4 people together meant 400 watts of continuous, free, unstoppable warmth. No fire, no fuel, no electricity, just biology. WWII builders didn't ignore this. They designed around it. They understood that heat doesn't just come from the stove, it comes from life itself. So cabins were deliberately compact. Ceilings were kept low to hold warm air close. Sleeping areas were snug, efficient, intentionally small. The goal was not luxury, it was survival through heat concentration. Military planners went even further. When designing heated barracks or emergency shelters, they calculated the exact number of occupants needed to maintain a survivable temperature using body heat alone. The warmth of the group was a strategic asset, something to engineer for, not something to ignore. And the results were astonishing. A tiny loft holding 4 family members could remain warm through body heat alone on all but the most extreme nights. No fire roaring, no stove lit, just the steady, living warmth of human presence. Contrast that with today, where we build cavernous bedrooms with vaulted ceilings, vast empty volumes of air that demand enormous energy to heat. We separate ourselves into big, open spaces and then wonder why the winter chill feels so relentless. The survivalists of WWII would shake their heads. They knew that shrinking the environment, not expanding it, was the key to staying alive when the cold pressed in. They understood that the human body is not just a passenger in winter survival, it is part of the heating system itself. And so, as we close this chapter, remember this final truth. Sometimes the most powerful technology is the warmth we carry within us. Now that we've uncovered all 10 of these forgotten secrets, we can finally answer the question that sparked this investigation. Why did modern builders abandon methods that kept entire generations warm without electricity at all? In the next section, we turn toward the uncomfortable truth behind that decision and what it means for the homes we live in today. The why. Why did we forget? The truth. Modern builders never tell you. After everything we've uncovered, after 10 secrets powerful enough to keep soldiers alive at 40 degrees below zero, a single question remains. If these methods were so effective, why did we abandon them? The answer is not physics. It is not convenience. It is not progress. The answer is economics. For thousands of years, humans built shelters that worked with nature: thick walls, thermal mass, solar orientation, earth-anchored foundations, and passive systems that needed almost no fuel. A home could stay warm for hours after the fire went out. A cabin could survive a blizzard with nothing more than thoughtful design. But in the last 80 years, something shifted. A quiet, deliberate shift. The heating industry realized something. You cannot profit from houses that heat themselves. You cannot sell furnaces to people who do not need them. You cannot charge monthly bills for passive heat flowing in from the sun, the soil, and the human body. And so construction moved slowly, strategically away from the high-mass, low-energy homes of the past toward thin, light, grid-dependent buildings that require constant mechanical heating. Modern building codes obsess over R value, the measure of resistance to heat loss, yet completely ignore the far more powerful principle of thermal storage. A wall of stone or brick might have a modest R value, but it can hold 10, 20, even 50 times more heat than fiberglass insulation. It behaves like a battery. It stores warmth. It releases it slowly. It keeps you alive when the grid fails. Yet storage is invisible. It cannot be packaged, patented, or sold. So it disappears from blueprints and from memory. Contractors push thin materials because they are cheaper. Manufacturers promote furnaces because they are profitable. Builders design homes with massive open spaces because it looks modern, even if it drains heat like a punctured water tank. And little by little, we forgot what our grandparents knew instinctively. A well-designed home is a heating system. A poorly designed home is a payment plan. This wasn't an accident, it was a business model. For 80 years, companies have profited from our amnesia, from our dependence on systems that break, bills that rise, and technologies that fail the moment the power stops flowing. And the result? Glass box houses that look good in brochures, yet shiver helplessly the moment the grid flickers. As we head into the conclusion, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The old ways weren't primitive. They weren't outdated. They were resilient, and resilience is something modern construction has forgotten how to value. Now let's bring all of this home and rediscover what a truly warm, truly independent, and truly human shelter can be. Conclusion. reclaiming the blueprint of resilience, a return to homes that refuse to freeze. As we come to the end of this investigation, picture one final scene: a dark, snowy forest. Two cabins stand side by side. The wind is howling, the power grid has collapsed, and winter is tightening its grip. In the first cabin, people shiver wrapped in blankets, waiting helplessly for the electricity to return. Their home was designed to work only when technology does. But in the second cabin, the lights may be out. Yet the people inside are warm. Their walls hold heat. Their floor radiates warmth from the earth. Their loft glows with rising air. Every part of their shelter works with physics, not against it. This is the difference between dependence and resilience. The secrets your grandparents used were not primitive. They were not outdated. They were not old-fashioned. They were battle-tested, refined under the pressure of Arctic storms, wartime shortages, and the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics. These techniques represent a kind of engineering that modern construction has almost forgotten, a form of wisdom that doesn't rely on power grids, monthly bills, or delicate machinery. And in a world growing more fragile, more unpredictable, and more energy-dependent by the year, this lost wisdom is not nostalgia. It is a blueprint for the future. We do not need to live exactly as people did in the 1940s, but we must understand what they understood. We must borrow their principles, their clarity, and their courage to design homes that protect us, even when the systems around us fail. So ask yourself, which of these 10 secrets surprised you the most? Was it the thermal mass foundation, the reverse sealing trap, the rocket mass heater, or maybe the idea that your own body is a furnace capable of keeping a small space warm through the darkest nights? And here's a bigger question. Would you ever build a thermal battery under your floor? Would you ever design your next cabin, or even your next renovation, with these forgotten principles in mind? If this journey changed the way you see your home, if it shifted the way you think about warmth, survival, and design, then hit that like button and subscribe to Historia Prime. Share this investigation with anyone building, renovating, or dreaming of an off-grid life, because sometimes the best technology is the kind humanity discovered long before electricity. Stay warm, stay resilient, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history.